everyone, my name is Elizabeth Smith, and for my exegetical paper I chose to do 1 Thessalonians 4, 13 through 18. And so just a little bit about 1 Thessalonians and where this passage fits in is, so this is an epistle to the church at Thessalonica, and we can see that this church was planted by Paul and Silas, and this is observed in Acts 17. And so this is the first letter that Paul wrote to the church at Thessalonica, and Paul begins the letter with encouraging the church for being good examples to the surrounding churches and other believers. And throughout the letter, until towards the end, Paul is just encouraging them in their faith and the way that they have been loving each other, and just really truly being a good example as a new church to other believers. And then Paul kind of switches over after a short prayer, and then he shares with them about sexual purity. And then Paul addresses an issue that had been very prominent within this church. And so what had been happening was they had been facing persecution for their faith, and this persecution can be observed even back to when the church was planted in Thessalonica. Paul and Silas came in and were faced such bad persecution that they had to flee the city because the religious leaders in the area were jealous of what was going on in the city. And so, yes, the persecution was going on. Believers, Christians were dying, and their fellow believers who were left behind were concerned and they were worried. And so Paul addresses this issue in the letter, and he starts off by saying, "I do not want you to be ignorant, my brethren, for those who have fallen asleep." And what this fallen asleep means is those who have passed away. And he says, encourages them by saying that if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, that God will bring them who are asleep in Christ Jesus, and he'll raise them to life. And so what Paul is saying here is that, my fellow brethren, although your brothers and sisters have fallen asleep, they have passed away, they can hope, they can grieve with hope. And that's a theme all throughout this passage, is grieve with hope, because one, Jesus has died on the cross, he has resurrected, and because of his resurrection, now we as believers, and them then as believers, when Jesus returns, they will be resurrected because of what Jesus did on the cross. Because of Jesus' resurrection, we will be resurrected and given new bodies as well. And then following this, there's also hope in the return of Jesus, not only in the resurrection, but also the return, that Jesus is in fact coming once again. And Paul addresses the return of Jesus, the coming again of Christ, throughout this passage, and says that, explains about how we who remain will be caught up together in the clouds and meet the Lord in the air. And there we shall always be with the Lord. But also it explains before this that first, those who have fallen asleep will be caught up first. Jesus will return, descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with a trumpet of God. And so God will raise to life those who have fallen asleep, and then he will call the fallen believers who remain to meet him in the clouds, and there they will be forevermore. And so Paul then encourages the church to comfort one another with these words, that even though they have lost their fellow brethren and who have fallen asleep, Jesus will in fact return, and that is where their hope lies. And so my thesis for this assignment was that this hope that Christians have was not merely wishful thinking, but rather a confident expectation. And this is something that Christians from, when the church of Thessalonica had first heard this word from Paul, that beforehand it can be noted that they had not heard this that Paul had shared with them, but this encouraged them, and this is what has been used since then for believers to comfort one another in loss, to have hope in grief, and that this is not wishful thinking, that I can just hope, and hope maybe I'm going to see my loved ones again who knew the the Lord and we're sealed. And maybe, I'm going to wish that I'm going to see them again. This is set in stone, confident expectation that Jesus will return and that we will be resurrected with Jesus Christ. And that's where hope can be found. So thank you so much.